welcome to the third episode of this series, but let's not prolong it. Let's get started because a lot is going to happen. The first thing we need to do is wash the model under warm running water so that the primer adheres well to the clean surface. Later, once the model is wet, we simply dry it with paper. But, for example, I dried my figurine with a hairdryer. I covered the model with white primer from a spray can, just as you'll see on the screen, and I put on gloves so I wouldn't get dirty. It's important that I only wear gloves on one hand so that I can spray the primer with the other hand. However, the primer didn't turn out very well, and I'll spoil it for you. It took me a lot of time to fix it. You'll soon see the results of how the primer turned out. I'm telling you, I basically ruined my model. Sometimes the spray can is just poorly made during production and the paint doesn't apply well. I once had a black primer that worked really well, but in this case, it created an awful texture, what modelers call an orange peel effect. You can see how rough all the surfaces turned out. I had to prepare for that, so I bought an acrylic remover and a cheap toothbrush. I took the model and placed it into a plastic basin, and I also used a pipette to pick up the acrylic remover, which I then poured over the entire model. This way, the paint should soften and become easier to remove with the brush. Here you can see me struggling to scrub off the paint with the brush, and unfortunately a few parts came off in the process, which I then had to reattach later. There are a few more shots of me scrubbing with the brush at a very quick pace, and when I poured the remover with the pipette earlier, it had flowed down to the bottom of the basin. To avoid wasting more, I simply take that still relatively clean remover and apply it again to the model. The model now, after cleaning, you can see that at the bottom of the basin, there's an awful sludge of paint left over. Here are a few parts that came off during the process. Once the model is cleaned, I simply take the white primer that you see here. It worked wonderfully compared to that previous spray can primer. To thin it out, I take a thinner and dilute the paint in a 1-to-1 ratio so that it has the consistency of milk. To paint the model, I use this somewhat unusual airbrush, which unfortunately is not very well known among modelers who build tanks. It's more popular among those who work on cars and various large Japanese figures. This airbrush is really great for large surfaces like dioramas, and it's also excellent for priming tanks as well. I'll attach the link in the description, and you saw how I'm painting a piece of an airplane. That's just my test piece, where I check primers and different paints to see if they apply smoothly. Well, I forgot to do that with the spray can, but that happens to everyone. And now I'll just show you a few shots of how the painted turret turned out using that primer from the airbrush. Now I'm going to start painting the model with the darkest of the paints I'll be using, which is a dark green paint for Russian camouflage. I'm not going to paint it all over the model, but rather in the areas where there are recesses, where there are shadows, and I'll thin it the same way as that primer, or even a bit more, 1-to-1, so that it has the consistency of milk. Listen to the music. Here are the results. Next, I painted the model in the same way as before, but this time using a slightly lighter paint across the entire model. Now we'll begin painting the highlights. First, the smaller highlights, and I'll show you how I paint them in a few places higher up, not lower, because the lower you go, the darker the model becomes due to the shadows. Right now, we're building up the brightness, and you can see that in the close-up of the turret. Highlights I also do on different parts of the wheels. Now I'm using the lightest paint, which I also shake vigorously, and before painting it in certain areas, I apply modeling clay to make sure I don't go where I don't want to. I paint the paint only on the peaks of the turret to create a well-differentiated surface. On the very ends, just as the light falls, to create that beautiful lighting effect, and these are the results. Unboxing my new wet palette from Army Painter, and no, this isn't an advertisement. I bought it with my own savings, and I'm just showing you what it looks like. It has a nice sponge that we need to soak with water, and 50 different sheets that are like parchment paper on which we can simply place the paint. And when one of these sheets wears out, we just remove it and put a new one in its place. I always like, after such extensive painting, to just take the paint and touch up some areas that we might not have painted or where the airbrush couldn't reach, like here. Stowage. It's important to note that I like to start by painting all the wooden elements, such as the crates in my model or the logs. For that, I use various light paints like Iraqi sand, and I paint all the crates in different shades. In different colors, so that people get the sense that everything isn't painted in a straightforward way, but rather that different crates and various wooden items have different wood tones. Then I do a second very important thing, if not the most important one. I will dry brush all the wooden boxes in their respective shades. So for example, if I have a light wooden box, I'll dry brush it with an even lighter paint. But if I have something darker, more of a brownish tone, I'll dry brush it with a light brown. And the third most important thing when working with wooden boxes, wooden crates, is oil paints and the so-called oil brusher from Amamiga. I absolutely love this dark brown color. I thin everything with an oil paint thinner and apply it to every wooden surface, which creates these beautiful shadows and gives everything its own unique tone. I highly recommend it. It's truly the fastest and most effective way to create your wooden boxes. Now we'll start with another type of stowage, namely the bags with tents, basically rolled up blankets. For these, I use two paints, khaki and khaki green. I'll show you the painting process up close for these rolled up blankets. And at the beginning, I simply coat them with paint. Then I take a dark brown paint thinned with water and coat the entire bag again. I'll demonstrate this on just one example so that you have a good reference for how to do it. Now I paint it again with the same color I used before to slightly improve the appearance of the bag, since it has become much darker. And once again, just like before, I paint the bag, but now with smaller amounts of paint on the highlights. This time, I'm not using the same color as before. Instead, I've lightened it with a lighter shade, so the bag becomes brighter. Now I'll paint the protruding blankets that we created in previous episodes with brown paint, and I've also already painted the straps that hold these bags in place. The straps that I've already painted with the previous color will be lightened even more with a brighter paint, which I'll show shortly, and I'll be holding a slightly darker paint in my hand to use as a wash, adding a nice texture to those blankets. As the lighter shade, I'll now paint in the same way I painted those bags, gradually lightening up the blankets that aren't folded. create that cool pop effect, I use a bright silver to paint all the locks on the wooden boxes, as well as the locks on the straps that hold the bags. Now I'm simply applying all the remaining colors in a satisfying way to finish painting the rest of our storage. I'll now simply paint all the parts that haven't been painted yet, such as you can see in red, that canister with oil, and also that gray can, probably with ammunition, and the fuel canister with gasoline. Chipping, as you saw in the thumbnail, I promised chipping, and I got the order a bit mixed up because generally, as you can see here, chipping is done before painting the storage. So I'm really sorry about that. And for the first part of the chipping, I'll now paint various areas with silver paint where the welds might have worn down. And I promise you that the effect will be fantastic after the wash, which we'll cover in the next episode. A bit of time lapses. For this part of the chipping, I'll be mixing these two paints together, and it'll create a highlight on the regular vehicle surface, resulting in various little dots and chips, not the edible kind, but the ones on the tank. I'll achieve this by tearing up a porous sponge into smaller pieces, and then applying it with tweezers, layering it more and more onto the model. This sponge that I've torn up needs to be thoroughly dabbed on paper, because if I don't do that, it'll cause a disaster that none of us would want. A bit more time-lapse action coming up. For the third chipping process, I'll use this paint, which I'll mix thoroughly and apply on a wet palette. Then with the tiniest spray I have, I'll carefully add it onto the turret. Just like you see, here are some close-up results. I'm also doing some chipping on the barrel itself, and those tiny little chips sometimes merge into one larger spot, creating a more pronounced paint wear effect. Painting the tracks. I'll do it just like in my shorts video that I've already posted. First, I'll use a lighter brown paint with an airbrush, and at the same time, I'll be priming the tracks that are already painted in real time since I made that shorts video. I definitely encourage you to check it out. From now, I'm doing everything quickly here, and the details are more thoroughly explained in that full video. Sometimes the effect on those tracks is very simple. They're just 3 colors, a brush, and layering them on top of each other. If you enjoyed today's episode, I highly encourage you to subscribe and give it a like so that more people can see my content. It really helps me out when making these videos. I also encourage you to check out previous episodes if you haven't seen them yet. Feel free to leave comments on what I can improve. And now I'll say goodbye. The last thing we need to do is varnish the entire tank, and the next episode will focus on weathering the tank. Bye for now.